Where do you need me, Ben? Where's my mark? Where's my mark?
I'll make it easy for me. I'll make it easy.
All right, thanks, Mike. All right, well, I have a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation set up. A lot of it is just going to be from me and talking, and then I'm going to try and leave some time for Q&A, because this is just the type of profession, there's always good Q&A. So I have a few slides to show you. Some of the lettering might be small. I'm going to help you with some of that. I just put it together more to remind me and give you some interesting images to look at than I did to give you content in the slides. We do a lot of training as police. We know the term death by PowerPoint. I'm not going to give you death by PowerPoint today. I'm just going to give you some images to look at, and we're going to talk. So one of the topics that came up in discussing speakers for this month, and I have somebody coming in next week that's going to talk about our nonprofit that operates in coordination with the police department, the Police Activities League. But this week is really more to speak to the curiosity of some of the folks that I've talked with here at the club, having to do with modern policing, how policing has changed, what we need to do differently. And I'll start with, if I can, right, so it's just the arrows, right?
Yep, should be there on.
All right, there we go. So I'll start a little bit with my background, my immediate background in policing. Yeah, that might be important.
Okay.
My background in policing. So I spent about 17 years doing what I would describe as like chase the bad guy stuff, right? So working in patrol, I worked in the narcotics unit, I worked in detectives. All of that is kind of like, you know, chasing down people who were committing crimes, finding suspects, putting people in jail, getting prosecutions, that type of thing. All that's very, very important in our business. But I came to the point where it was important to me to learn about the other side of the business. How do all the different pieces and parts within the police department keep the police department running? What's the relationship between the media and the police? What's the relationship between the community and the police, and how does that all shape what we do every day? So I took on a job in 2010 that nobody else in my department wanted to do. The term of the description of the job was community relations sergeant. But at that time, what it was that supervisor was in charge of neighborhood watch, some of the other peripheral community-oriented projects that we had. That person was also a liaison to various different non-governmental organizations, some of the ones that you all are probably familiar with from prior presentations, like Peninsula Conflict Resolution Center and some of the work that they do, some of the more focused ones like CORA's, Community Overcoming Relationship Abuse, and also in coordination with our Police Activities League and some of the things that we do out in the community. It's not the sexy running down the street chasing bad guys stuff that a lot of our folks like to do. And so I wanted to learn something different. Do you have a question?
Did you start it up, or was that already in existence?
It was an existing position, but the position was kind of contained to that. It was neighborhood watch, it was some community organizations. But I also knew that one of the relationships in that position was I was working under the designated public information officer, who was a lieutenant who had that responsibility. There was a lieutenant that was in charge of internal affairs and some other stuff, but that was also somewhat of a throwaway position in our department. It's a position that nobody wants, because nobody wants to be on camera, nobody wants to talk to the news, nobody wants to be responsible to condense down and talk about the good work that we're doing and put that information out to the public. And I thought, you know, this is an opportunity not only to learn about how that relationship works, but also kind of be the face of the organization in doing that. So I took on that job. I ended up apprenticing into the public information position, ended up kind of completely reformulating that position, because at that time, like 2011 going on 2012, law enforcement was really starting to get into use of social media, and pushing our message out proactively to the community. And so, being the person that was taking that job on, I had the opportunity to kind of formulate that and create our own philosophy in terms of putting information out to the public. And what we do today, and what I'm going to talk about in the rest of this presentation, is really the evolution of that moment where we decided that we needed to be more proactive with how we got information out to the public. But what you have now, and what's going on in law enforcement in general today, is things have gone from, the Reed Malloy officer-friendly days where the cops were pillars of the community, who were people that kids felt comfortable that they could go to, people that everyone in the neighborhood knew and felt like that they could be comfortable with, to really almost a villainization of law enforcement, and a lot of negative information in the media, a lot of negative information in communities, a lot of kind of counterculture with that of, the police aren't being held accountable enough, the police are, they're cowboys and they're out, doing violent things in public and people can't trust them. And it's a misnomer, and I'm not going to get super defensive about it. I'm only going to say that police uses of force, 1 in every 67,000 police contacts results in a use of force. Police contact over 1 million people a week. And so you can see that these incidents are very, very rare, but because of the way media likes to grab onto these incidents, they become very highlighted in the news. And so that has changed the perception of the public, because we know now that the public moves very quickly through media and takes a lot of notice of that. And so things that are really, what the news folks might call sexy to the news and help to sell advertising and everything else, are the things that the media runs with, and those now have become the highlights, and that's now the image of police. And so we need to do things differently in order to counteract that negative press that we get. But there's a lot of inspiration from the community to go out and film the police. Everybody now has a video camera in their pocket, and that has changed the police culture dramatically. And I think not necessarily in an awful bad way, and I'm going to explain a little bit more about that in a second. So things are the same, but they're a little bit different. I have a few images here that I want to highlight for you. One of them is, this is something very typical that you see in the news now, lots of protests. And in fact, a lot of these protests start out as well-meaning protests from folks who are citizen advocacy groups who have every right to be exercising their First Amendment right to free speech. And they get taken over by anarchist groups who seize the opportunity and then turn those into violent confrontations. And once they're turned into violent confrontations, the police have to come out and help preserve safety. And once there's a police line standing in front of a line of folks wearing masks and being very counter and violent towards police, that's when you get these confrontations, and that makes for good news, and it's on the news almost every day. So that's kind of what we're dealing with. The other piece in the lower left corner, that's actually 2 of our really good patrol officers engaged in what we now call First Amendment checks. So there are a lot of folks that are out in public now that do film back of us as we are in contact with them, asserting their rights, being very difficult with us, trying to goad the officers into trying to light their temper fuse and get them into an angry confrontation, which then gets posted onto YouTube and becomes very highly publicized. And a lot of that is people just trying to goad our professional officers into being unprofessional. And so we have to do a lot of training with our folks about how to handle these things, about how to remain calm, about how to not allow themselves to be baited by that activity. But it is very, very pervasive right now in our society. The upper left picture here, I like that one because it's 3 cops of our current generation. They're all on their mobile devices. It's good and it's bad. It's good in the sense that we have a whole generation of officers that are coming up in the business now that understand exactly what YouTube and other social media platforms are all about, how those things can rapidly become viral and explode in the media. Very well versed in being on camera, being in that position where their image is exposed to the public. This is the YouTube, Facebook, Instagram generation. They have no problem with their images being out there. They have no problem with kind of being accountable through media to the rest of the world. And so it's an important component of what we need to do as we recognize that this is not going away. It is only going to continue to develop. And so we now have personnel. We know that they can swing with that, but there's a little bit of a battle between old school police culture and how our modern folks are going to ultimately be interacting in public. So a little bit of history. This is how it has progressed over the last several years. Really started in 2014 with a couple of major events, including the incident in Ferguson that pretty much everybody is familiar with, as well as a very high-profile shooting of a subject with a knife in Chicago on a bridge that I believe the officer was then convicted for his use of force on that. And then a situation in Cleveland where there was a young child with what turned out to be a BB gun that officers confronted and ended up shooting tragically, and it turned into a very big public issue and a very big public question in terms of, how do police use force? How do they attempt to de-escalate? What measures are in place to ensure that when they come upon a dangerous situation, that they're doing what they need to do to render the situation safe and as reasonable a manner as possible. And I will tell you this from my experience, and I've been now with the police department for 26 years. I've seen a few things in our department, but I've also been in a position to observe a lot nationwide that's happening. And it's important to note that there are situations that happen for police that happen in the blink of an eye. And there is no time for police to make any decision other than to do something to immediately render that situation safe. Sometimes that involves use of deadly force. And while it is always tragic, sometimes that is the only option that officers have when they respond. That tenths of a second, few seconds that officers have to make those types of critical decisions then become the subject of massive scrutiny of what those officers were thinking about and what options they sorted through during those seconds that they had to make the decision. And that's really difficult for law enforcement. It's one of the things that puts law enforcement in a difficult spot. This whole situation progressed over the period of a couple of years and ended, didn't end, but really kind of evolved into even more confrontational situation in 2016 when officers started to be targeted in violent attacks as a reaction to all of this officer accountability questioning that was occurring. Then there became a faction that just resorted strictly to violence, and there were officers that were killed in Dallas, there were officers that were killed in Baton Rouge in New York City in violent ambush attacks, and those ambush attacks have continued, and now they are even more frequent in one-on-one situations where police are immediately tagged upon making contact with people, very similar to what happened in Sacramento this week. There's no opportunity for negotiation, no opportunity for any type of discussion, just an immediate outward ambush attack on police, and tragically officers are being killed. One of the things that happened, and a lot of the peripheral pictures that I have here have to do with the situation in Baltimore and Freddie Gray. For those of you who don't know about Freddie Gray, Freddie was taken into custody for a criminal incident, put inside a police transport van. Something happened during the ride from where he was arrested to the place where he was to be booked in. He received some horrible injuries and ended up dying as a result of those injuries. There were officers that needed to be investigated and held accountable for that. However, the city of Baltimore had its own already exploding inherent problems, and that really rolled over into an overreaction and a quick reaction by some law enforcement folks who were really pandering only to the angry citizen side and not looking at it objectively. There were some hasty charges that were filed that ended up being dismissed, and in the meantime, you had a city in complete unrest. You had an organization that had lost a good portion of its leadership capability, and you had police officers that didn't want to do anything on the street because they felt that they weren't being supported at all. So now you have a city that's got real problems, drug and alcohol problems, violence problems, gang problems, and now you have a police force that doesn't want to do anything because they're afraid that anything that they do, they'll be scrutinized for. And then you have a situation where this is a leader in the police union who says criminals feel empowered on the street. They feel like that nothing's going to happen no matter what they do. And so that presents a really difficult situation for police, and we need to figure out how to counteract that. So in California, how has society reacted? Legislation has led to the release of many felons out of the prisons back into the public because our prisons are overcrowded, and they made the decision, well, let's just let them out. So they let out a large number of convicted felons, just released them from their prison sentences as part of law and part of a judge's direction. The next set of laws created lighter sentencing for some of the crimes that hit us the hardest as everyday citizens and everyday members of the community. Property crimes, the property crimes are on the heavy rise. Residential burglaries of vehicles, everybody that's getting property that's taken from them. There's really no sentencing to cover and hold those folks accountable. So now you have all of these hardened, convicted felons who know that there's no penalty for them to commit property crimes. They're out committing property crimes. But it doesn't mean that they're not armed in a lot of cases, that they're not very violent in a number of cases, and that they're not very willing to confront police in a very violent way, or lead police on long, very fast police chases, which we tend to not do anymore, and then they get away in that way. So there's a lot of leniency and latitude to the criminal element. On top of that, you have what I described already as rapid magnification of police confrontation incidents in the media. And then the latest bit of legislation takes those records that previously were internal affairs and internal investigations of officers that were confidential as personnel records by state law, and has turned that over and now made those records that involve officer-involved shootings, officer misconduct cases, now are a public record. And I'll tell you this is my personal perspective on it. There are other states that have sunshine laws, and sunshine laws essentially say that all the public records are public and publicly viewable. This type of release of confidential police records, which have been confidential in California, has already been public in other states. That's a direction that's not going to change. Nobody's going to make those records more secret. They're only going to become more public. So as police organizations, we need to kind of get along with that program and understand that's part of transparency. That's part of what we need to do to show what we're doing to the public and show that we're holding people in our organizations accountable. That's a train that's coming, and we have to get on board. So how have we reacted? A lot of defensiveness by law enforcement across the country, feeling like they're being picked on, feeling like nobody is advocating for our folks in the police culture, really feeling like the business is different such that a lot of folks who are veteran officers are saying, I couldn't do the job that you guys are doing now today because there's too much accountability involved, there's too much that you have to do to make yourself think during critical situations where you should just be reacting and rendering a situation safe. It's just too hard anymore. There's a lot of that defensiveness. The president back in end of 2014, beginning of 2015, set up a national task force group to look at police accountability and what types of measures police need to take in culture in order to move forward, evolve, and improve, and set up these 6 pillars, and I know you all can't read them, so I'm going to read them to you. One is building trust and legitimacy. The second is policy and oversight. The third is technology and social media. The fourth is community policing and crime reduction, and that's also through technology. And then there's training and education. And then the final category is officer safety and wellness. And so identified a number of things that are important in police culture for us to focus on in order to be high-functioning 21st century law enforcement, public safety personnel. I will tell you this, each one of those 6 categories in California, especially in the Bay Area, and even more especially in this county and with our police department, these are things that we've been doing for the last several years. None of that was new to us. What they came up with in 2015 as recommendations nationwide are things that progressive California law enforcement agencies have already been doing. So all of these things are already in play. All these things we are currently keeping under consideration. And I do have if any of you are interested, I do have a 2-page document that I can send you that talks about everything that our police department is doing in relation to those 6 pillars that I put together as part of a couple of queries that we got a couple of years ago. I know I have 5 minutes, but if I have time a little bit later, I'll tell you about that. So, what are we doing proactively? Lots of social media, proactive messaging going out to the public. We're putting things out first before the news gets it. We're telling our stories so that there's not a spin that's being placed on it that the news tends to do. They tend to shorten it. They tend to minimize. We need to provide context, and that's what we're doing. Lots of community engagement. Lots of good old-fashioned community policing that we've been doing for many, many years, but very much out in the public, and high exposure of our officers to the element in our community that we need to know face-to-face in order to have good relationships. Specifically what we're doing, lots of public meetings. We're passing out that 2-page document in our public meetings so folks know what we're doing in relation to what the latest standards are and what the latest reports are and what law enforcement needs to do. Lots of messaging and social media. As I said, coffee with a cop is a really big thing. Most of you are probably familiar with kind of what that dynamic is, but essentially we send our officers out. We set them up in a coffee shop of one of our local coffee shops for a couple hours, and they're just available for the community to come in, have questions, have interaction. We bring our motorcycle officers that can show off the bike. We bring some of our dogs in. We give the opportunity for the community just to interact with the police in a friendly environment that's not a police-related contact. And then lots of community policing. Recruiting tomorrow's police officers. So I don't know if you all are familiar with the term warrior versus guardian. Police use these 2 terms a lot. Generally speaking, police are really a mix of the warrior and the guardian, right? We have a lot of things that happen where we need to really take a mentality of immediate protection of the public or immediate action to apprehend someone who has been a risk to the public. That's really the warrior mentality. But then there's also the guardian. We serve to assist the people that are most vulnerable in our community. We serve to assist people who cannot speak and advocate for themselves. We serve people who have needs in our community and need to feel safe, and we need to face-to-face have that interaction with them and make them feel safe. So that's really the guardian mentality. And we have in the past, recruited a lot of folks, like my generation and the ones before that, folks who had been either in the military and involved in actual combat or contact sports where they're used to putting their hands on people, martial arts, contact sports, both of those things where they're used to putting their hands on people, used to being able to get rough if needed, and then taught them the soft skills of community policing and some of the other things along the line. The new face of the recruitment group that we have, we need to find the folks that have the soft skills, and we need to teach them how to protect themselves and their community. It's a complete reversal, and the recruitment philosophy has not quite caught up with that, so we're still working on that. Body cameras, that's something that I was personally dedicated to and implemented. We got a communication that came from the civil grand jury in 2016 that recommended body cameras. I had already been talking to my chief and recommending body cameras, so we went forward with that. And by November of 2017, every single police officer in San Mateo had body cameras deployed, and we're up and running with that system. This is just an interesting stat for us, that community relations position over. We had about a 400-member neighborhood watch listserv. That was our point of contact with our community. Only when we really felt like we had to put something out, and really very reactive. This is now very proactive to the public. Over 33,000 direct subscribers right within our city. Those of you who are on nextdoor.com know that the requirement in order to register is that you have to live in that jurisdiction. So direct communication to 46% of our households in San Mateo, which is just a huge and very high level connection with our community, as well as lots of subscribers across various social media platforms. And really that's the most important part of what's next, is we get those subscribers in. So two things. Number one, we can push information out to them that's really important. The second is we know where to reach them in an emergency and how to get our community mobilized in the event of an emergency. We have lots of different platforms over which we can get that message out, make sure that they're informed and that they're doing what they need to do to be safe. So I think that's the last slide I have. I would love to switch over and show that video. I think it's 3 minutes long. If you guys will indulge me, I know I'm over probably by a few seconds.
Real quick, I just invited everyone here that besides Sylvia, that she was already part of it, to Facebook, your page.
Oh, good. Thank you. So you can see the level of community engagement and how important that is to us, and I encourage you to look at other departments' recruiting videos, and you'll see sometimes a vast difference between what we are looking for and some other agencies. It's still very dramatic music, very action-oriented, lots of SWAT stuff, because that's the sexy stuff in our business. With us, it's like, come to us, join our community. Join a group of officers who really like to connect with the public. If you want to advocate for members of the public, come join us. And so that's really what we're looking for. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you.